Oh, hello, students. I didn't see you come in. I just wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the things we would have addressed at the start of tonight's class, had tonight's class met. And so what I want to do is just go a few items. One of them is to talk about the quiz that you took. So I'm just going to very quickly blast through that. First question was, according to Plato, the knowledge we gain from our senses is superior to knowledge gained from reasoning, and that is false. So Plato and some other people have a relatively low opinion of what comes into our senses and have a much higher opinion of what we apprehend through reason. And a good example of one of the things we apprehend through reason would be sort of mathematical objects. Which of the following accurately describes Plato's Timaeus? It's one of his longest dialogues. Yes. It was one of his latest dialogues. Yes. It exerted a powerful influence throughout the Middle Ages. Yes. So all of the above. And one of the reasons it exerted a powerful influence, in addition to that thing I put on the board where Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then Aristotle is the teacher of Alexander the Great who conquers the ancient world. So as an alumnus of this school of thought, he spread a lot of these ideas. The other reason that Timaeus in particular has an outsized influence, it was one of the few that was translated into Latin and was generally available through the Middle Ages. So a lot of ancient thinking and ancient documents were lost. Some of them were maintained, but this is one of the few that was widely available when the Greek world gives way to the Roman world, and so a lot of people were able to read the Timaeus in Latin. Timaeus uses the analogy, as being is to becoming, so is truth to belief, to argue which of the following about his account of the cosmos. And so the answer is B. Since the cosmos is a material copy of an ideal object, the account of the cosmos need only be likely to be true. And this relates back to being and becoming. Being 2 plus 3 equals 5 is absolutely true because these are ideal objects. The fact that Mount Everest is 29,029 feet tall, well, it's really just a material copy, sort of an imitation of the ideal Mount Everest, and so therefore approximation is good enough. So any answers about the material world, it's kind of good enough for government work, okay? From what three things did the universe come into existence according to Timaeus? Being, becoming, and place. And that's kind of a weird collection of things. Lucretius has only two things, atoms and vacuity, or empty space. Plato, he's got being and becoming. It's like, okay, I can see these are kind of different, but what does place have to do with it? If he had said, time and space, that would be a pretty nice way of covering everything, as Einstein did. But being, becoming, and place, it's a weird collection. Okay, what branch of mathematics? It was geometry. And I was going to bring in today to class Euclid's Elements. So we'll talk a little bit, maybe in one of the other videos, about the fact that these ancient Greeks were really good at geometry. They had very advanced geometry. And Plato was very good at geometry. So even if he's using some maybe bogus geometric arguments in the Timaeus, it's not because he didn't know any better. In one of his other dialogues called the Meno, he supports his idea that of course it must be the case that we knew everything before we were born. Our soul knew everything before we were born. And for us to learn something new stuff cannot come into our mind or soul. What happened is we can just be reminded of what is already in there. And so he has a demonstration where they take this guy who's a slave, who clearly hasn't been the beneficiary of a good education, and they prove to him that the square root of 2 is irrational. It's like, okay, that's some pretty heady stuff. And the slave got it. Why? Because by being shown the proof, he was just remembering part of the everything that he always knew in the first place. Okay, so geometry is huge, and we're going to see a bit more of it in Galileo. Aristotle's History of Animals was just as flawed as his other natural science treatises about motion, optics, and the structure of the universe. Several of you said that was true, but no, it was false. So in the introductory materials to the Aristotle reading, there was a quote from someone who says, "It was the first systematic and comprehensive study of animals," and much of it was not wrong. Granted, his claims about if you make a camel mate with its mother, it'll then commit suicide, this is myth. Some of his biological claims are supported with lines of poetry from Aeschylus' plays. Not all that scientific, but by and large, his biology was better than some of his other natural science. Into what parts does Aristotle initially divide the human body? The head, the neck and trunk, 2 arms and 2 legs. And what facial feature does Aristotle say can be an indicator of bad disposition or dishonesty? And it was the corners of the eyes. So again, this is where it's getting a little bit iffy. And what might occur if a breeder forces a stallion or male camel to breed with its mother? The stallion or male camel may attack the breeder or even commit suicide. In addition to empirical observation of various animals, what other sources does Aristotle use in his History of the Animals? Lines from the dramatic poet Aeschylus. So these last 3 things make his biology seem not all that good, but much of the rest of it was actually pretty good and was sort of the beginning of ways to think about biology in terms of classifying different animals, different plants, different parts of an animal or plant. And one of the things Aristotle is, he is the great classifier. He is wonderful for putting different things in boxes, and he made some pretty darn good boxes. Okay, a couple questions from last class meeting. One was Dr. Jacobs wondered, well, what was the ring of fire doing there in that Ptolemaic model? And so I've got an explanation of that, and I will put in a slide. Okay, these 2 questions, the answers are actually in pages in a module called Additional Resources and Answers to Questions that Arise in Class. And so 3 from this semester are at the bottom of that. The other resources are things that we stuck in there a couple of years ago, and I expect some of them would be useful again this year, so we haven't eliminated them. So the first question is, why is there a sphere of fire? And there are 2 reasons. One is one model of the universe proposed by Anaximander, a pre-Socratic natural philosopher, says, here's the Earth, and it's surrounded by these cylinders, and the cylinders have holes in them. And so basically, when you see what appears to be a star or a planet going across the sky, that's a hole in the cylinder that you're seeing through to the ring of fire, which is out there. So that's one version of it. And the other version of it comes from this 4-element theory where you've got earth, water, fire, and air. So earth and water are 2 heavy ones, and they tend to move downward. So if you picked up a cloud of dirt and let it go, it's going to fall down to the earth. If you look up on a rainy day and you see water falling down to the earth, whereas air, we've seen things where mist is sort of rising, and fire, if you're watching a fire, you see the flames go up. So those 2 things are believed to rise. So the 4 elements, 2 of them, earth is in the center, and then you've got the realm, sort of the sphere of water that rain comes from, and then above that is air, and then the lightest one is fire, and all this is between us and the moon. So that's what the ring of fire is. Now, the other question was, Agnes asked if there was some problem with Galileo having as his patrons the Medici family. She says Medici, I said Medici. Hers pronounces probably better than mine. So was it problematic for Galileo to have the Medici be his patrons? Well, it turns out 4 of the popes previous to Galileo's running into trouble with the Pope were actually members of the Medici family. And so they're listed on that page. Pope Leo the 10th is from 1475 to 1521. Then we get Pope Clement the 7th, Pope Pius the 4th, Pope Leo the 11th. And so basically there was a Medici Pope when Galileo was born. And 5 years before he published Starry Messenger was another Medici Pope. Now, when he published the dialogue concerning the 2 world systems, that Pope was not in the Medici family. So there is the possibility that there was a conflict between patronage by the Medici family, who are probably the 2nd wealthiest family in Italy at the time, and the Pope, who is probably the wealthiest person in Italy at the time. So it's an interesting question and might be something interesting to research. All right. So those were 2 questions that came up in class. And then what are we going to do now? Okay, I'm going to stop this one and save it because I've got an additional PowerPoint that I'm going to load up and then I will narrate that. But it relates to something I had mentioned in passing in last class, and it had to do with the variety of things that are occurring at this time. There's a lot of things moving, a lot of moving parts in the 2 centuries that precede Galileo's publication of the dialogue concerning the two world systems. So I have a PowerPoint that has the dates for the relevant people. And so I'm just going to load this one up now and start a new one. Talk to you soon.